It was an ordinary weekday morning in the heart of the city. People bustled through crowded streets, juggling coffee cups, briefcases, and smartphones as they made their way to work. Among them was Sarah, a high-ranking executive at a major tech company. She was a polished, successful woman, always dressed to impress and accustomed to getting what she wanted. On this particular morning, she was rushing to an important meeting, a career-defining moment for her. But her day was about to take a turn she never expected. Standing on the curb outside her luxury apartment, Sarah impatiently scrolled through the Uber app on her phone. She tapped her foot, annoyed that her assigned driver was still a few minutes away. When the car pulled up, her annoyance quickly shifted to disbelief. Behind the wheel sat a black man, dressed casually in a polo shirt and jeans, smiling politely as he rolled down the window. "Are you Sarah?" he asked. Sarah hesitated, her polished exterior momentarily cracking. Her eyes scanned the car and the man, her expression hardening. She had made assumptions before he even finished his sentence. "Yes, I am," she replied curtly, already uncomfortable. For Sarah, this was more than just an Uber ride. It was a moment where her unspoken biases would surface, biases she likely didn't even realize she held. What started as a routine commute would soon become a shocking encounter that would leave her rethinking everything she thought she knew about success, respect, and leadership. As Sarah approached the car, her unease was palpable. She hesitated before opening the door, glancing around as if looking for an alternative. The driver, who introduced himself as Marcus, waited patiently, maintaining his polite demeanor. "Are you sure you're the driver?" Sarah asked, her tone sharp and skeptical. Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am, your name matches the booking. Please feel free to check the license plate." Her frown deepened. "I don't know, I just expected someone else," she muttered under her breath. "No." She lingered by the door, making it clear that she wasn't happy with the situation. When another Uber pulled up nearby, Sarah's face lit up. She hurried over, assuming that this must be her real driver. "Excuse me, I think you are here for me," she told the second driver, ignoring Marcus. The second driver checked his app and politely informed her that he was assigned to another rider. Embarrassed but undeterred, Sarah returned to Marcus's car. Without an apology, she finally slid into the back seat, letting out an audible sigh of frustration. Her attitude didn't stop there. She questioned Marcus's driving skills, asked why he had chosen this kind of job, and even made dismissive comments about the music softly playing on the radio. "Do you actually make enough doing this?" she asked condescendingly, as if his worth could be measured solely by his profession. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus, however, remained composed, refusing to let her negativity affect him. Despite the sharpness of Sarah's tone and her barely concealed disdain, Marcus handled the situation with remarkable grace. He had likely faced situations like this before, encounters where people judged him based on nothing more than his appearance or his job. "I do okay," he replied calmly when Sarah questioned his earnings. "It's a good way to meet people and stay busy." His answer was simple, free of any defensiveness or anger. But behind his calm exterior was a man who had learned to rise above prejudice, who had faced judgment and refused to let it define him. When Sarah continued her string of comments, Marcus responded with quiet professionalism. He didn't argue, didn't react. Instead, he focused on the road, ensuring she arrived at her destination safely and on time. His demeanor spoke volumes. By refusing to engage with her negativity, he silently communicated a powerful message. Dignity doesn't depend on someone else's approval. The ride itself was tense, though Marcus's calm presence diffused some of the awkwardness. Sarah sat stiffly in the back seat, scrolling through her phone and avoiding eye contact. She clearly wanted nothing to do with Marcus, treating him as though he were invisible. Marcus, for his part, focused on the road ahead. He tried to break the silence once or twice, asking polite questions like, "Is the temperature okay for you?" Or, "Would you like me to take a different route?" Sarah barely responded, brushing off his attempts at conversation with curt, one-word answers. Her disinterest and condescension were palpable, creating a wall between them that Marcus chose not to push against. At one point, Sarah's phone buzzed with a call. She answered it loudly, speaking in an overly cheerful tone that contrasted sharply with her earlier demeanor. It was clear she was speaking to a colleague, perhaps someone from the meeting she was rushing to. "Yes, I'll be there shortly," she said. "And no, I'm not late. I'm just dealing with some, delays." She shot a glance at Marcus in the rearview mirror, as if blaming him for her imagined inconvenience. The call ended and silence filled the car once more. The tension was almost tangible, but Marcus remained steady, guiding the vehicle through the busy streets with quiet focus. As the Uber pulled up to the gleaming glass skyscraper where Sarah worked, she barely waited for the car to come to a complete stop before gathering her belongings. Her movements were brisk, almost dismissive, as she pushed open the door without making eye contact with Marcus. "Thanks," she muttered, the word falling flat and devoid of any genuine gratitude. She didn't tip him, didn't acknowledge his polite smile, and certainly didn't offer a kind word. To her, Marcus was just a driver, someone who had done his job and was now forgotten. But Marcus wasn't forgotten. Not by fate, not by the universe, and certainly not by the story that was about to unfold. As Sarah strode confidently toward the sleek revolving doors of her company's headquarters, Marcus stayed behind in his car for a moment, watching her retreating figure with a subtle, knowing smile. He wasn't angry, he wasn't resentful. He was patient, even amused, as though he was part of a grand play, and the next act was about to begin. Calmly, Marcus turned off the ignition and parked the car. He grabbed his briefcase from the passenger seat and stepped out, adjusting his jacket as he walked toward the same building Sarah had entered moments earlier. His every movement was unhurried, deliberate, and composed. Marcus knew what was waiting inside, and he was ready for it. Inside the building, Sarah had already made her way to the conference room on the top floor. It was a pristine, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the bustling city below. The room was filled with her colleagues, all abuzz with anticipation for the morning's meeting. The company had recently announced the appointment of a new CEO, a man whose name carried weight in the industry, but whose face was largely unfamiliar to the staff. An email had introduced him weeks earlier, outlining his impressive credentials and ambitious vision for the company. This would be their first time meeting him in person, and the air was thick with curiosity and excitement. Sarah, as usual, was at the heart of the conversation. Seated near the head of the table, she exuded the confidence of someone who knew her place in the hierarchy. She chatted animatedly with a coworker, speculating about the new CEO's leadership style. "I just hope he values results over showmanship," Sarah remarked, crossing her arms. "We've worked too hard to get to where we are. We need someone who recognizes that." Her colleague nodded in agreement. Everyone in the room was eager to make a good impression, but Sarah, ever ambitious, saw this as an opportunity to shine even brighter. The hum of conversation fell silent as the door to the conference room opened. All eyes turned toward the entrance, and the new CEO stepped inside. There was a moment of stunned silence as Marcus walked into the room, carrying himself with the same calm confidence he had displayed earlier that morning. Dressed sharply in a tailored suit and holding a sleek briefcase, he exuded authority and composure. But the real shock wasn't his poised demeanor or polished appearance. It was the fact that Sarah recognized him instantly. Her mind raced, her thoughts colliding in a whirlwind of disbelief. It can't be him. There's no way. But it was him. Marcus, the man she had dismissed and belittled during her Uber ride, now stood at the head of the table. Her jaw dropped as the realization hit her like a freight train. The Uber driver she had treated as beneath her was no mere driver. He was her new boss, the CEO of the entire company. Sarah froze in her seat, her body stiff with a mix of shock, confusion, and growing dread. She glanced around the room, hoping no one else had noticed her reaction. But it was too late. Some of her colleagues were already exchanging puzzled glances, their expressions filled with curiosity. They had seen her step out of his car earlier. Whispers began to ripple through the room as people connected the dots. Marcus, ever composed, met Sarah's wide-eyed gaze with the same calm smile he had worn earlier. It wasn't smug or vindictive, it was steady, knowing, and unshakable. His eyes held hers for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of the morning's events, before he shifted his attention to the rest of the room. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus said, his voice warm, yet authoritative. He placed his briefcase on the table and looked around, meeting each person's gaze with a calm confidence that immediately commanded respect. It's a pleasure to finally meet you all in person. The room erupted into polite applause, though Sarah's hands remained firmly in her lap. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and a faint blush crept up her neck as she tried to mask her discomfort. Marcus continued, his words effortlessly captivating the audience. He spoke about his excitement to lead the company, his vision for the future, and his admiration for the team's hard work. But even as he addressed the room, there was an undercurrent to his words, something that Sarah couldn't ignore. Before we dive into strategy, Marcus said, his tone deliberate, I want to take a moment to talk about values. As a leader, I believe that success isn't just about what we achieve. It's about how we treat the people we meet along the way. Respect and integrity are non-negotiable in any team I lead. Though his eyes never rested on her for too long, Sarah felt every word like a spotlight shining directly on her. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers gripping her notepad as she avoided eye contact. Her colleagues, still unaware of the full story, nodded in agreement, clearly impressed by Marcus's emphasis on respect and professionalism. To them, his words were inspiring. To Sarah, they were a mirror reflecting her behavior from that morning in the harshest light. As Marcus wrapped up his introduction, he opened the floor for questions. Sarah kept her head down, praying that the conversation would steer away from anything that could expose her further. But the damage had already been done. Her earlier actions, though unspoken, loomed over her like a dark cloud. When the meeting finally ended, Marcus remained at the front of the room, speaking with a few employees who had lingered to introduce themselves. Sarah, desperate to escape the growing whispers around her, gathered her things and made a beeline for the door. But as she reached the exit, Marcus's voice stopped her in her tracks. Sarah, he said, his tone calm but firm, could I have a word with you in my office? The room went silent. Sarah's colleagues exchanged curious glances as she turned slowly, her face pale and her hands trembling. She nodded stiffly, her voice barely audible. Of course, she said, following him out of the conference room. As they walked down the hall together, Sarah felt the weight of the morning pressing down on her. She knew this was a conversation she couldn't avoid, and one that would change her forever. Inside the modern glass-walled conference room, the air buzzed with excitement as Sarah and her colleagues prepared to meet the company's new CEO. The announcement of his appointment had been a major event within the company, with weeks of anticipation leading up to this introductory meeting. Everyone was eager to meet the man who would shape the future of their organization. Sarah sat near the head of the table, her usual place of prominence among the company's rising stars. She smoothed her blouse, confident that her contributions to the company's success would not go unnoticed by the new leader. Oblivious to the storm brewing in her personal world, she chatted lightly with a coworker, making small talk about the company's recent successes and the importance of today's meeting. The chatter in the room quieted as the door opened. All eyes turned to the entrance, and Marcus walked in with confident ease. The moment was electrifying, a stark contrast to the casual, understated demeanor he'd shown earlier in the car. The reaction in the room was immediate. A mix of surprise, admiration, and curiosity spread across the faces of the employees. But no one's expression was as shocked as Sarah's. She sat frozen, her eyes wide as she processed what she was seeing. The man she had mocked, dismissed, and treated with disrespect earlier that morning was now standing at the head of the table. Her Uber driver was her new CEO. Marcus placed his briefcase on the table and surveyed the room, meeting everyone's gaze with an air of calm authority. His eyes lingered on Sarah for just a moment, and though his expression remained neutral, there was a flicker of recognition that made her stomach drop. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding his gaze as her mind raced. The rest of the room, unaware of the backstory between Marcus and Sarah, remained focused on their new leader. Marcus began speaking, his deep, steady voice commanding attention. Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here and excited to lead this incredible team into a new chapter. The room erupted into polite applause, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to join in. She sat rigidly, feeling as though the walls were closing in. The weight of her earlier actions pressed down on her, and for the first time in her career, she felt completely out of place. Marcus wasted no time setting the tone for the meeting. He introduced himself not just as a leader, but as someone who valued integrity, respect, and collaboration above all else. His words were carefully chosen and his message was clear. This was not just about him. It was about building a workplace culture that empowered everyone. But as he spoke, it became evident that his opening remarks carried an extra layer of meaning. Without naming Sarah directly, Marcus addressed the issue of prejudice and respect in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. Before we dive into the details of our goals and strategies, he said, I want to share something personal. This morning, I was reminded of the importance of treating people with dignity, no matter their role, background, or appearance. Leadership isn't just about titles or positions. It's about how we interact with everyone around us. His words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone in the room. A few employees nodded in agreement, clearly moved by his sentiment. Sarah, on the other hand, felt like the spotlight had turned directly on her, even though Marcus hadn't so much as glanced in her direction. She felt exposed, her earlier behavior replaying in her mind with painful clarity. Marcus continued, his tone steady but firm. The way we treat others says more about us than it does about them. In my experience, kindness and respect are not just values, they're strengths. They build trust, foster collaboration, and create environments where people can thrive. The room erupted in applause once more, this time with genuine enthusiasm. Marcus's words had struck a chord, setting a powerful precedent for his leadership style. But for Sarah, the applause felt deafening. She kept her head down, hoping no one would connect the dots. As the meeting progressed, Sarah's discomfort grew more and more apparent. Her colleagues, still unaware of the full story, began to notice her uncharacteristic silence and fidgeting. Normally a confident and vocal participant, she now sat quietly, avoiding eye contact and nervously tapping her pen against her notepad. Marcus's composure only made her humiliation worse. He was calm, professional, and entirely unbothered, which only emphasized the glaring disparity between his behavior and hers during their earlier encounter. Her colleagues began to whisper among themselves during a brief break in the meeting. Is Sarah okay? One person asked. She seems off today. Another coworker who had seen her step out of the Uber that morning raised an eyebrow. Wait, wasn't he her driver? That's the same guy. The realization spread quickly, and soon the whispers grew louder. Sarah could feel the weight of their stares, the heat rising in her cheeks as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. By the time the meeting resumed, Sarah was visibly shaken. She kept her head down, scribbling notes she didn't need and avoiding any opportunity to speak. She was no longer the confident executive who had strutted into the building that morning. Now she felt small, humbled by the enormity of her mistake. After the meeting concluded, Marcus approached Sarah with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout the day. Sarah, he said, his tone even but authoritative, could I speak with you privately for a moment? She froze, her heart sinking. There was no way to avoid it. This conversation was inevitable. She nodded stiffly, gathering her belongings and following him to his office. Once inside, Marcus gestured for her to take a seat. He closed the door, creating an atmosphere of quiet professionalism. I want to talk about this morning, he began, his voice steady but firm. It's not about punishing you or embarrassing you. It's about addressing what happened and ensuring it doesn't happen again. Sarah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, she stammered. I didn't realize. Marcus held up a hand, cutting her off gently. It's not about who I am, he said. It's about how we treat people, regardless of their role or position. You assumed things about me based on nothing more than my appearance and the fact that I was driving an Uber. That assumption reflects biases that have no place in this company or anywhere else. His words weren't harsh, but they carried weight. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she nodded again, too ashamed to meet his gaze. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his tone softening. This is a moment for reflection and growth, not shame. We all have blind spots, Sarah. What matters is what we do once we recognize them. He gave her a moment to compose herself before continuing. I expect better from my team, and I believe you're capable of better. Take this as an opportunity to learn, and let's move forward with mutual respect. Sarah left the office feeling humbled, her mind racing with thoughts about the day's events. It was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The story of Sarah's encounter with Marcus didn't stay confined to the Uber ride or the walls of the conference room. It spread like wildfire throughout the company. Whispers turned into conversations as employees pieced together the events of the morning. The realization that Marcus, the new CEO, had been treated disrespectfully by one of their own shocked the staff. What began as gossip soon evolved into something deeper, a moment of reckoning for the workplace culture. Employees began reflecting on their own biases, questioning whether they had ever made similar assumptions about others. The incident became the spark for conversations about unconscious prejudice and the importance of fostering a more inclusive environment. Marcus, ever the leader, didn't shy away from using the situation as a teachable moment. Within days, he announced a company-wide initiative to address diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. Respect and integrity are the foundation of any successful organization, Marcus said during a company meeting to introduce the initiative. It's not enough to excel in our work. We must also hold ourselves accountable for how we treat one another. This company will be a place where everyone feels valued, no matter their background, role, or appearance. The initiative included mandatory DEI workshops, open forums for employees to share their experiences, and partnerships with organizations dedicated to promoting workplace inclusivity. Marcus also encouraged employees to participate in community outreach programs, reinforcing the idea that respect and empathy must extend beyond the office walls. The impact was immediate. Employees began engaging in deeper, more meaningful discussions about how to create a culture of inclusion. Team dynamics shifted as people became more mindful of their words and actions, and a newfound sense of unity began to take root. For Sarah, the ripple effect hit particularly close to home. She found herself at the center of these conversations, not because Marcus had named her specifically, he never did, but because the lesson was impossible to ignore. Her colleagues, while supportive of the broader message, were also subtly watching her, curious to see how she would respond. Determined to make amends, Sarah took proactive steps to address her behavior. She attended every workshop, often asking questions and participating in discussions. She began connecting with colleagues she had previously overlooked, making an effort to understand their perspectives. Slowly but surely, she started to rebuild her reputation, not by apologizing repeatedly, but by demonstrating a genuine commitment to change. Marcus's leadership inspired not just Sarah, but the entire organization. His decision to handle the situation with grace and focus on the bigger picture reinforced his credibility as a leader and set the tone for the company's future. It didn't take long for the story to escape the confines of the company and reach the outside world. An employee, inspired by Marcus's humility and leadership, shared the story anonymously online. The post quickly went viral, spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. The post detailed the morning's events, from Sarah's initial behavior in the Uber to Marcus's dignified response during the meeting. While no names were mentioned, the story struck a chord with people around the world. Imagine treating someone like dirt, only to find out they're your boss, one commenter wrote. This is the ultimate example of why you should treat everyone with respect. Another added, this CEO is a class act. The way he handled the situation shows true leadership. The story was picked up by major news outlets with headlines like, Uber ride turns into powerful lesson on respect and leadership, and CEO teaches employee a lesson she'll never forget. Marcus became an overnight symbol of humility, grace, and effective leadership. Journalists reached out to Marcus for comments, but true to his nature, he declined to focus on the incident itself. Instead, he used the platform to emphasize the broader message. This story isn't about me, he said in an interview with a prominent business magazine. It's about the importance of treating people with dignity and the power of self-reflection. We all have moments where we fall short, but those moments can become opportunities for growth. The public response was overwhelmingly positive. Social media users praised Marcus for turning a difficult situation into a teachable moment, and many shared their own stories of learning not to judge others based on appearances. Meanwhile, Sarah became a subject of online speculation, though her identity remained anonymous. While some criticized her behavior, many acknowledged the importance of her transformation. The fact that she took responsibility for her actions and actively worked to change resonated with people who saw a bit of themselves in her story. The story's viral nature turned it into a global, teachable moment. Companies began sharing it in their own DEI training programs, using it as a real-world example of why inclusivity and respect are essential in any workplace. Quote, "This isn't just a lesson for the workplace, it's a lesson for life," one commentator wrote. "You never know someone's story or their potential. Always lead with kindness." For Marcus, the incident solidified his place as not just a CEO, but a leader who embodied the values he preached. For Sarah, it marked a turning point in her career and personal growth. And for the world, it became a story that reminded everyone of the simple yet powerful truth: respect costs nothing, but means everything.